Good afternoon and welcome to this very special birthday edition Pervasive Media Studio online lunchtime talk. On the 17th of April 2020, in response to the pandemic, we took our long-running lunchtime talk series online. And for the last year, these have been live every Friday at 1 p.m, beaming out onto your smartphones, laptops, iPads and living room televisions. We've had social VR and the poetics of data. We've had burgers made of insects and parties held in spreadsheets. We've had the future of pleasure and the history of the video call. But most of all, we've had some fun. There's a whole year's worth of great talks you can watch here on this very YouTube channel, so please do dig in. My name's Martin O'Leary, and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio's creative technologist. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. Especially a big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio, or in this maybe the first time you're engaging with us. For all of you newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas, companies and a meeting place of both creative and commercial industries. We're a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free for our residents. And most of all, we're a safe space for artists to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. This week's talk is by choreographer Adrienne Hart and roboticist Hemma Filamore. They'll be talking about their new project, Unraveling the Origins of Loneliness, and exploring social connectivity and collaboration using bio-inspired robotics. There'll be a Q&A at the end, with the talk running at roughly 40 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just pop them in the chat window and I'll pick them out. Or if you like, you could tweet your questions to @PMStudioUK. There'll be a captioned version of this talk available here after this talk is finished. Now, before we start, next week's talk is by artist Matthew Plummer Fernandez. He'll be talking about the interrelationships of algorithmic systems, pop culture and contemporary issues, as well as how his work in particular has shifted in response to the climate crisis. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK, @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel, hit that button, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. And please feel free to share this link now on any of your socials. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Adrienne and Hemma.
Hi, it's Adrienne here from Neon Dance.
And I'm Hemma from Bristol Robotics Lab.
Great, so I will kick off. I want to talk a little bit about a new project called Prehension Blooms that came about through a kind of quite lengthy process actually. And I'm going to be talking a bit about how it came about first before I share some prototype designs and ideas with you. I'll then hand over to Hemma, who I've been collaborating with for almost a year now, I think. And she'll be talking a little bit more about the use of technology and how we plan to integrate swarm robotics into this live performance work. So a bit of background first. Those of you that might not be aware of Neon Dance, it's a company based in Swindon, which is just up the road from Bristol. For the past 16 years, we've been creating dance works that explore technology and design with the body as a central tenet. And collaboration really is at the heart of my practice. And I bring together artists, musicians, technologists, scientists, and academics to create collectively what we cannot create alone. And for the past couple of years now, I've had the absolute privilege of working with two major art festivals out in Japan, Echigo-Tsumari and Synthesizer. It feels a lifetime ago with COVID and being at home and not on the road, but it's really, those two festivals have very much influenced my practice. So both festivals support rural communities who engage with artworks, not as spectators, but as collaborators. And this led me to consider why, given our hyperconnectivity, loneliness is so prevalent today. My experience in rural Japan was that there was a genuine sense of community, and both festivals had somehow fostered a sense of curiosity in the local people. They genuinely saw themselves as collaborators, and they weren't afraid to reach out, to ask questions, and to take part. They saw them. They wanted to share their stories, and they also saw value in their contribution. So I went away wanting to unpack and unravel the origins of loneliness and understand better isolation, companionship, and belonging. So Prehension Blooms is very much a work that's come out of that period of researching ideas around loneliness and exploring the idea that loneliness stems from the interaction of the individual with the social realm. So that it's not just mental, but also physical, sensorial, and material. And of course, the pandemic has played a part in this work. We've been forced to develop ideas through remote collaboration. However, there's been some positives that have come out of that process. For example, that kind of collective lived experience that we've all been through has informed the decision to embed an offer within the work for remote audiences, which I'll go on to describe in a little bit. So being lonely, I've come to this conclusion that being lonely in the 21st century is as much about how people are connected to places, things, and others as it is about individual psychology. Through the writer Dr. Faye Bound Alberti, I discovered the word didn't exist in the English language before the 1800s, with the word oneliness more frequently used before this date. And if loneliness emerged as a word and therefore probably an experience in the 1800s, I think it's really important to ask why. And it's this line of inquiry that's led Neon Dance to create this new work, Prehension Blooms. So alongside myself, Hemma Filamore, I've also invited the visual artist Anna Rekovic, the composer Sebastian Reynolds, lighting designer Nico Duruc, and a team of highly skilled dance artists to join me in developing this new work. Audiences will be free to roam in a performance space that can scale up or down. They will encounter an insect-like robot community and each other in playful and unexpected ways. By moving, sitting, lying down, and congregating in the space, audiences can influence all aspects of the performance. Prehension Blooms can function as a 60-minute performance work or as an installation. And for example, we plan to premiere the installation format out in Japan this autumn. However, we will be also touring the full live performance work from autumn 2022 here in the UK. As with previous work, and go to neondance.org if you're interested in having a look at what we've been up to before this. Prehension Blooms will be presented in a range of different spaces and places, and therefore we've really had to consider a flexible design. However, overall, the aim is for members of the public entering the space to feel intimately connected to their environment. And within our sort of robot community, and I will be sharing some images, some prototype images in a sec, so you can have a sense of what we're currently developing, there will be up to 6 teleoperated robots, which enable remote audiences to traverse the environment, interact with physical audience members, fellow robots, and performers. And an example of the technology used to achieve this social interaction can be experienced at the Avatar Cafe in Tokyo. And I'm sure other initiatives will be popping up in the UK soon too. And this additional element has come out of us asking the question, how can I be present and connect with other bodies in a space where I am not? So finally, our public engagement activities include creating a set of easy to operate building block devices to demystify the work on robotics being embedded into this production. In a series of workshops taking place in Cornwall, Brighton, Bristol, and London, there will be the opportunity to help co-design our robots, and these robots will respond to movement and touch. For me, it was really important to not create these robots in isolation, but at every stage in their development, have members of the public feeding into the process and informing the design. And of course, that's where you guys come in today. So hopefully you'll kind of have some great questions for us as we go along. So I'm now going to start to share a couple of images before I hand over to Hemma. So hopefully you can see this first image that I've just brought up. So this is at a Reykjavik studio out in Berlin. As I said, it's very much a remote collaboration at the minute, but it's been a really fun process actually of feeding designs and ideas back and forth. Now, this base here is not designed, it's literally just representing what will be the kind of the core body of the robot. And those of you that are familiar with the robotics world, think of in swarm robotics, a kind of epoch type device, so about 8 centimeters or so wide. And then we've been developing these different designs where, and I'll just kind of flick through so you can see a few different, this is the same design, but thinking about how it might move through the space. And of course, imagining that this model is currently designed in wax, but what kinds of materials? Is it a 3D printed form? And if so, how much flexibility will it have? And also how sturdy can it be? So if we're inviting members of the public to share the space and to touch and interact with these robots, they really need to be able to potentially, say, wrap around an audience member's hand, and that to, over a period of time, not result in them falling apart and dying after 1 or 2 performances. So yeah, as you can see, these are very early designs, but very much kind of bio-inspired, so looking out to the natural environment. But what we didn't want to do is create something that immediately meant that you would connect it to a specific insect or animal, because I think straight away that means that there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And we wanted to sort of create an alternative space where audience members can dream and imagine another world, but a world very similar to our own. So I'm going to just come out of this and share one more of our designs. And again, those that are interested in following the process, we will be continuing to share and document everything that we do online. So you just have to head to neondance.org. And very soon we'll have some great kind of behind the scenes video footage to put up on there. So this is a similar theme, having this kind of base, but then these kind of 2 arm type tentacles that could come out. And earlier when I was discussing this idea of the tele-operated element, once this center base is designed, we need to think about where the camera might go, or cameras. If you imagine the cameras as the creature's kind of eyes, it doesn't have to be on this base. I had some really interesting discussions with Hemma around could they be actually at the end of these kind of tail arms, whatever you want to call them, and what would that mean in terms of the visual field of our remote audience? It means that they could perhaps look back at themselves, imagining them embodied as a bio-inspired robot. It could be that they could flick from one robot to another to have a different angle or a sense of the space more widely. Yeah, and I particularly like this because of imagining that idea of curling around a body. And of course, we're thinking both in terms of the public engaging with these robots, but also integrating live performers and what might be possible there as well. Okay, so the final thing I'm just going to show before handing over to Hemma is visually it will look very, very different, but I'll explain myself. So we've been thinking about these robots, if they are to bio-inspired, if we're imagining they've somehow evolved, come up through nature, we need to think beyond just the body of the robot itself, but its immediate environment. What does that look like? Do they cohabitat with others in the space? What's their do they create, for example, I love this design. This is social birds that share, they have these kind of multiple nests collecting in one tree. So we were kind of looking out to nature to find our inspiration for a possible scenography. And the next image I'm going to show you, when you first look at it, it almost looks like something that could have been 3D printed. And it's actually fungi, which I find absolutely fascinating. So these do exist in nature. And they're very, very interesting structures that, again, we could play with in terms of imagining our robots potentially building these structures themselves. And as I go through, there's a few different images. Again, just there's a pod that a seed would emerge from, but really thinking about, yeah, how do they exist in our imagined world, and kind of going beyond the body of the robot itself. And of course, these create opportunities to be quite playful in terms of how the public would engage with the robots. Do they come up to a structure? Are they able to look into it, encourage robots to come out of it? Yeah, so again, these are just a few images to share with you to have a sense of where we're going with this. Yeah, hopefully you can get inspired too. So yeah, just finishing on that final one of another amazing structure that I couldn't quite believe is something that comes out of nature and not 3D printed. So there we go. So yeah, now I will hand over to Hemma, and yeah, it's going to be talking more. Well, Hemma will talk a little bit more about the use of technology in this new production. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. Can you see my screen? No, is that wonderful? Okay, so yeah, so my name's Hemma Filamore and I'm a lecturer in robotics. I'm based at University of Bristol, and in non-COVID times I'm normally at the Bristol Robotics Lab. So I wanted to start by just kind of talking a bit about the lab and the space there. It's a really, really big physical space, and it's all kind of divided up by glass partitions. So there's a lot of different robotics areas that occupy the same building, and so it's this amazing place for kind of cross-population of different ideas and allowing different areas of robotics to feed into each other. So although there's a lot of different types, this project I guess encompasses three main areas, which are assistive robotics, swarm robotics, and soft robotics. And these are all sort of standalone groups in their own right at the lab. The one that I belong to mostly is the soft robotics group. So I wanted to talk a little bit about soft robotics first, just to kind of introduce this as a topic and look at why we want to kind of use this in this project. So soft robots are, I mean, they're just generally robots with soft bodies. So this they can be sort of robots with soft actuators and sensors, and with different types of control. So moving away from more conventional sort of silicon-based controllers and sensors and into things that could be kind of liquid controlled or chemically controlled systems. They're really good at replicating the sort of biomechanics and biomimetic behaviors that we see in nature. And in doing that, they are sometimes more suitable for interacting with the natural world or with the biological world. So this kind of inherent safety that means that interacting with humans is sort of safer, but also maybe a little bit more intuitive. And they're starting to be more kind of present in the world around us. So the sort of more recent commercialization of soft robotics really sort of kind of plays on the strengths of being resilient and being adaptable to different environments. And those are all things that that I think soft robotics really brings to this project. So my work within that, I sort of mostly look at what I call environmentally integrative robotics, but there's a few different things that covers. So I look in some of my work at robots with energy self-sustainability. The image that you can see is a little robot called the robot because it rows along like a water boatman. And this robot has a sort of an artificial stomach. It's like a sort of biological battery called a microbial fuel cell. And inside of that, bacteria digest biological matter and they generate electricity through doing that. And that energy is then harvested and used to drive the robot. So this is a robot that we developed something to have energy self-sustainability. It would kind of like generate enough power to sort of forage for its next meal from its previous stomach full of food. The other things that I look at are things like soft and bio-inspired mechanical actuation, so taking inspiration from different organisms. So this is the example of the water boatman beetle that the robot was based on. But we're looking at other interesting organisms in the lab and trying to sort of replicate their behaviours. We also look at this in more of a materials context, so looking at smart materials that behave like some of the natural structures that we see in biology. So materials that will respond to environmental changes, for example, things like temperature. And so creating actuating robots that don't require external power as an input aside from just what's available to them in their direct surroundings. And so in doing that, this work has sort of turned into robots that are more for environmental exploration. And with my little team of PhD students at the moment, we're looking at robots, soft robots, particularly for exploring extreme environments, things like soft robots that will get in and out of a crater of a volcano and robots that will explore underwater. So I think what ties all of this together is how these are all robots or artificial organisms, as we like to call them, that interface with natural ecosystems in one way or another, either by being safer, by being more similar to the environments they're in, sometimes by being biodegradable so that they sort of can become part of that environment again at the end of service life. And something that I've become more interested in more recently is how these robots behave not only in natural ecosystems, but in social ecosystems as well. Through things like taking our robots into public spaces like the Science Museum. It's been really cool and interesting to see how people kind of connect with the robots and see their roles in their own personal lives when they're not kind of in, I don't know, like a program or a publication about the robots, but they're actually there physically occupying the same space. And I think that a lot of the sort of fear around robotics, I suppose, that there is at the moment, and the fear around automation, you know, some of that is totally justified, and some of it maybe comes from a place of uncertainty. And so I think something that I hope will come out of this work with Neon Dance and with Adrienne is sort of through more familiarity with robots, dispelling some fears or some apprehensions that people might have about robots. So this second example that I just wanted to show is not really, it's not a robot at all, but it is a digital synthesizer. And so the controls for the synthesizer are built into pieces of fabric. So they're soft, they're compliant, they can kind of fit around different structures. And these were used as part of an art exhibition that I organised in Kyoto, where I used to live in Japan. And the idea here was that even though there weren't kind of the sort of, knobs and buttons that would indicate how the sound was changed, that as we can kind of see, my friend Simon in my lab who's moving around the synthesizer on the floor, you can kind of develop this relationship with the sound and start to learn start to kind of understand how moving your body altered the sound, and sort of develop this kind of set of kind of connections with how the sound changed in response to human motion. So this sort of got us to thinking about, or some of these ideas fed into thinking about a sort of research question that we're exploring through this work, which is how can I be present and connected with other bodies in a space where I'm not? And I think this really fits in with sort of robots that we're starting to see more so in kind of art spaces, cultural spaces, and those as an enabler for people rather than something sort of working against them. So the example on the left is a really nice example that was a collaboration between another group in Bristol Robotics Lab and the Hastings Contemporary Gallery, where robots were used to help people come in and kind of remotely access art exhibitions through lockdown and prior to that. The example in the middle is one that Adrienne mentioned as well, where it's a cafe that opened in Japan last year. And in this, people with severe physical paralysis are able to work as robots, work through sort of avatar representations of them in the form of robots in the cafe. So it's got this really nice kind of meeting of, I guess, some of the current shortcomings of robotics, where an intelligence wouldn't be able to an artificial intelligence wouldn't be able to completely take over this role, and all of the sort of human behavior that comes with it. And at the same time, it's robots being an enabler for people rather than something that sort of invalidates humans. So in this, I think we're really, sort of interested in seeing what the role of soft robotics can play in this. And yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sort of initial stage work towards this. How we started exploring this was through sort of some master's projects at University of Bristol, and looking at things like tracking human motion through sort of wearable devices that could be then used in the control of a robot. So this was, it's nice in the sense of a student project, but what we realized through doing this is that kind of strapping things to your body isn't the most sort of intuitive, inviting way for someone to interact with something. So since then, we've been workshopping some different ideas with groups of dancers. This work was supported by the Cezanne Foundation, and looking at how we can create interfaces that are sort of friendly for people to, or work with interfaces that are friendly for people to use, where they can kind of link up different behaviors very readily without needing to know how to program, for example. And so we've run some workshops where we used a software called Isadora, which is designed in exactly this way. If any of you've seen things like the Scratch programming language, which is used to teach children programming, it works in a very similar way, in that there are different kind of functional blocks, and you connect them together using these sort of virtual wires. So you've got a very kind of visual and intuitive way to construct these different little systems. And so in doing this, we worked with a group of dancers and created these little sort of customizable sort of little programs that allowed them to control some virtual objects on the screen with their motion, either by following the sort of center of motion in a frame of view, or by following some colored objects, and just kind of allowing people to interact in what was initially, this sort of virtual space by control of a kind of virtual object, and sort of inviting people to think of that object as an extension of themselves. So in the workshops that we now have planned for the coming months, we'll be looking more at translating this into a physical space. So looking at how we can have, as Adrienne said, quite sort of robust, cheap to produce, able to produce in kind of quite large numbers, little robotic actuators that are also quite kind of like mostly derived from open source and easily available components. So it's something that we hope, can be kind of fed forward into wider activities, but things that can also be assembled into multiple different sort of embodiments of robots. So something that this sort of bending actuator we can picture in a lot of the designs that Adrienne shared, the kind of bending of two arms, but they could become the legs, the tail, something that's very flexible in terms of where we can use it within a robot. And so just to kind of tie this in with the images on the previous slide, you can see that there's also sort of issues around things like speed of robots, motion, depending on the way that they're actuated. But in this last little window, there's just in the background, this is me trying to set up some sort of actuator and visual with very short time available. But you can hopefully see a kind of a hand moving and the robot sort of following the hand. You can see the response is quite slow, but it's hopefully sort of an intuitive enough action that people can learn to sort of control that motion using their body without too much need for kind of sort of instruction or support. So we started talking, Adrienne started talking about the workshops and the installation that we are going to sort of share this work through and develop this work through. And we've received some funding to do this, which is great. And this has also kind of influenced a little bit how we structure the work. So this started off as the idea of having these very standalone kind of building block devices that could be assembled into different morphologies, and then to sort of play with how the behavior of these robots would work. But how we're kind of exploring that now is to sort of look at these as two different parallel streams. So looking at having these little tentacle-like actuators in whatever form they end up taking, and to allow people to kind of assemble those into what they feel a body, how they feel they want the body of the robot to look in order to be representative of themselves in another space. So thinking about movement, thinking about size, which will also kind of determine what types of actuator are sort of most appropriate to use, and kind of things like sensor placement on the body of the robot. And the other way that we're looking at this, so I suppose in this first sort of line of inquiry, we're taking an initial prototype and forming a kind of end stage prototype that looks something like these sort of beautiful designs that Anna's created. And in this second sort of line of inquiry, taking something that is sort of, fully formed to begin with, but looking at how people can then interact through that. So how might those robots sort of display some sense of a sort of social community within their little group, and how people feel about self-representation by operating the robots remotely through teleoperation. And then tying these together to take forward into whatever our next steps sort of become. So I'm just going to sort of end on this slide, which is just, I guess, a bit of a visualization of this kind of curiosity around what people will create, given this question, how can I be present and connected with other bodies in a space where I'm not, and whether people will choose to create something that is more like an organism, maybe not a human, but something quite insect-like, where they'll choose to create something that is very much like an organism that's very different from them, that might be sort of plant-like, or behave like one of the sort of fungi structures that Adrienne showed, or would it be something where you might want to represent yourself as something that is broken into a number of different little smaller individuals or robots. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to end there and just thank Neon Dance and our current funders, the Brigstow Institute at University of Bristol. And yeah, I think that will take us into the Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you very much, both of you. That was fantastic. Yeah, some really fascinating things. Everyone in the chat, get your questions in now. But seeing as everyone's being slow, I'm going to kick things off. I had a question, actually, I think probably mostly for Hemma. So there's a big issue with telepresence stuff around lag and latency, and this idea that things don't respond immediately. And it seems to me that soft robotics is just going to make that problem so much worse, because soft robotics is always very slow and gradual to respond to things. So I was
Yeah,
wondering.
I mean, not all soft actuators are slow. Things that are sort of actuated electrically can be very fast. But I see what you're saying in the sense that is there a lag and then is there another lag? So I think this is a really nice opportunity, the sort of workshopping idea, to see how much that lag kind of influences how people feel about movement, and to design movement where that sense of lag is less there. So I think if we were to, for example, try to replicate the example that I showed with the hand, we can see that already, even when those, the sort of the camera and the computer, which is connected by a wire to the little robotic actuator, there's already some lag there, which is totally sort of coming from the soft robotic actuators that are in the body of the robot. But if I was to, for example, if I was to move across the room and it was to follow me, I think that would still, even though I'm kind of moving across a bigger space, that kind of translation of scale into a smaller scale might sort of make it feel like the motion was at a sort of more appropriate mapping, that the latency wasn't as obvious. And I think we can only really determine that through, that's why these workshops are such a useful thing in this type of robot development, because it's very difficult to know how someone is going to feel when connected to something until they're actually working with it. So I think that's where it will be really, really interesting and kind of critical to have this kind of participatory research at the really early stages that takes it into what the actual motion looks like and how we make that meaningful to people.
Right. Yeah. Adrienne, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, just I totally agree, and the integrating members of the public throughout the process is absolutely vital, and will shift and shape so many aspects of this work as we evolve. And I think we're thinking in terms of the teleoperating element of this production. We're trying to think beyond the work itself, and that perhaps there's an opportunity for live audiences and remote audiences to engage before and after a performance. But also I'm thinking in terms of previous experiences of my background is in contemporary dance, but a production we were involved in called Mahajanika involved learning and embodying a completely different dance style, traditional Thai dance. And it was very, very slow, very different experience. But actually through that process, I became immersed in that world, and this slower, more meditative way of moving became me in that moment. And I wonder, through embodying a different a robot body that has its own way of being in the world, will that shift and change how I move or how someone else moves?
Yeah, can I just add to that? I think
please do. Yeah.
Also, that sense of, I think if we almost kind of, for us to sort of, I guess, truly achieve what we're setting out to achieve, I almost, I want someone to believe that they are in that robot body, and if that robot body moves slowly, I want them to kind of believe that that's their motion. And if they're kind of working against it, maybe it sort of still feels like another. But I think it would be a really cool thing to watch someone slow down to the speed of this other body and totally sort of immerse themselves in that.
I guess on that idea, have you thought much about feedback to the user in terms of how you slow them down?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing. If they are, as Adrienne sort of mentioned, with the idea of camera placement and the sort of line of sight of the robot, I guess normally if you're moving a robot around and it has a camera on it, it's facing out, it's looking at the world around it. But we sort of want to influence that self-awareness. So whether that is somehow that the robot is able, the person's able to sort of see themselves as the robot through where the kind of eyes actually are, or whether it's, probably in this context, like a visual cue back to the user. We play with the idea of things like sensors and actuators on the body. I think that that's something that it's kind of unlikely that we'd take forward at this point, because it starts to get very messy in terms of what the person using it has to be sort of literate in and aware of. And so it would be really, really nice if this is very familiar interface as to a user. And so cues at the user end, I think would be quite nice if they were sort of visual. And then in terms of what their sort of self-awareness, I think it would be where the sort of the view of the robot lies on its kind of physical body.
Great. So we got a question here from Lilium Volter. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Can you tell us a bit more about the aesthetic inspiration for the robots? I know I found those tendrily things quite creepy. Where did those come from?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So I've been working with Anna Rekovic, who's an absolutely brilliant visual artist, for many years now, and she has a very specific aesthetic, I guess, which does colour and shape the work that we do together. But I also love that, and she's absolutely looking out to nature for inspiration. And so it always fascinates me. Some of the things that she comes up with looks at times almost alien, and then yet you'll go back to her research and she'll say, look, here you go. You can just have to look out into the world, and you'll find these incredible biological entities that have coloured and shaped what she does. She's very much looking at the potential of the body, and kind of merging the body with in other contexts, in other forms. I just recommend going to her website, Anna Rekovic. I think it's annarekovic.com, or you can through Neon Dance discover her work. And it's always playing with an extension of the body, and kind of thinking what a body is and what it can do, the potential of the body.
Anything to add to that, Hemma, or?
I suppose just these kind of forms that. Sorry, you caught me off guard there a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Yep. All right. Cool. So we have one more question here from Hello Brigstow. How do the robots get to the people who are not in the space with the performance? So, what is the logistics of that? How does that work in terms of the audience in the space and the audience out of the space?
Yeah, we're still very much on a journey with that, discovering and really kind of having access in mind, and recognizing, we can't just presume everyone's going to have a laptop at home, and what can we do to ensure that as wide a range of people can access this technology as possible. So I don't have a direct answer yet, but certainly through the slide that Hemma showed of the workshop we did with the Saison Foundation, we had artists from all over the world. They were from Uganda, Latvia, Japan, Germany, and it was a great opportunity to test doing something online, and seeing how, and I wouldn't say it was necessarily 100% successful, but we learnt so much through that process of what are, and the fact that we just need to have as simple rules as possible to be able to access the technology. But at the minute, it's very much looking at needing to have at least a laptop with a camera in order to engage with the robots from a remote point of view.
Yeah, and I think there's this sort of our sort of anticipated setup is that the robots will occupy a space. So we'll hopefully, sort of COVID restrictions permitting, be a live audience there. But then the robots will sort of be, I guess, like an avatar or an enabler for people at home to sort of link with other robots, but also with the people, like the live audience in the space. And I think at this stage we are, as Adrienne said, making a lot of assumptions around the technology that people have available to them in terms of like a laptop to access it with. But I kind of don't see any reason why we couldn't, maybe extend this to something like a voice call and look at how sound could be used to actually, drive some aspect of the space. How we then feed that back to someone is another matter. So maybe it's targeting more a sort of software thing where someone doesn't necessarily want to be on a video call, but they could watch something through a laptop. But I think that's something that will be really, we've got this sort of initial idea for how that would work, but I guess there's a lot of different ways that we could, where we are at the moment with it, that does still have its barriers to people, but we're working to think around ways with that as well. And I think they'll maybe become more obvious as we do it as well, you know, like how ways that we could extend it out more. Like the whole point of it is trying to provide, sort of expand our performance, provide an enabler for people, and ways that we can do that further, I hope will emerge through that activity of doing that at the level that we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to add to that, you know, I've worked with some really brilliant groups with previous work. For example, Bristol Connect in Bristol, who are a group of visually impaired, brilliant people that helped so much in informing how a previous work might function for different audiences. And I think Hemma's absolutely right. It's only once we actually work with others, there's only so far you can get in terms of brainstorming in isolation.
Absolutely. And another question sort of following on from that, from Jen Law, who asks, what's the role of dancers and performers in this performance?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. And sorry, during this presentation, I didn't talk very much about the dancers just because of time, but they're absolutely critical. And so how we're imagining the dancers at present is kind of a dual role in a way. And one is to act as guides, to demonstrate how interaction with the robots might occur. So it could be that a dancer demonstrates or shows how touching a robot or putting your hand near a robot might involve result in it wrapping it, as I mentioned the example earlier, around your wrist. And then so perhaps when one of those robots comes up towards an audience member, they feel permission to do the same. But equally, there's, I guess, in terms of this production, there's kind of two stages in that we're working towards an installation without live performance, but then next year, going into 2022, what I'm planning on doing is kind of building a series of narratives within this kind of installation work for the performers. So, and that's very much inspired by this body of research around loneliness and belonging, and finding these little stories that connect for me, and creating these kind of images and scenarios where pockets of narrative might pop up and then lead to something else. So it's, again, very much in progress, but that's a plan.
Great. So I had one more question, actually. While I've got you, I'm going to ask this one. So we've been thinking a lot in the studio about telepresence, and particularly as we look towards, you know, moving back towards in-person activities, but understanding that not everybody's going to be able to take part in those. We've been thinking a lot about, you know, telepresence and, you know, the standard iPad on a stick model. And I was wondering if you think there's anything to be learned from work like this that can feed back into sort of more prosaic telepresence applications.
Yeah, I think that so something that I would really love to see is like kind of the way that you can experience like a topology or a texture through even the motion of a compliant robot. The sensor doesn't have to be there. You don't necessarily need a sensory feedback, but the way that a robot interacts with the space looks quite different from a robot that's rigid, you know, something like, as you said, the sort of double robots which are on a stick. And so I think that I hope that is something, well, yeah, that is something that I think could contribute to the sort of the way that we kind of see and use telepresence at the moment. The other thing is, I guess, kind of like that belief in self-representation a little bit. It would be really nice if, you know, this kind of adds to people's experience in kind of believing that they are really there. And so, I mean, these are all kind of quite speculative because it's kind of yet to be seen with this, whether people experience that. But those are the things that I think we'd really like to explore with it that could, you know, feed into how we think of and use telepresence currently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just to add, there's for me, it would be really special to create an offer for remote audiences that's unique. It's not trying to imitate live performance, because you can't. That's something different. But it's a unique offer that's still meaningful. And for me, a sign of a successful performance is, going to the bar afterwards and seeing people that don't know one another engaging in conversation about what they thought the piece was about, and to imagine a scenario where that could happen between remote and physical audiences is something that I think could be really special and has potential for this project and going beyond it in other contexts as well.
Yeah, it would be great if this offered like a different experience of being there as opposed to kind of a filtered experience of being there.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. I think that's a really useful way to think about it. So we've got one question here from Ben Kirby, who quite a practical one actually. How do you ensure that audience members, or I guess performers in the room, don't trip or tread on small fragile robots? And like, where are these things traveling? Are they on the floor? Are they at head height?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. And this is why test audiences are so critical to building a work like this. And we will, again, anyone that's interested in following our journey, please do get in touch, because we will be definitely wanting some test audiences to come in and trip over robots on purpose in order for us to learn. But they will, at the minute, we're looking at very much floor-based. Because we're thinking about a particular scenography, there are ways to devise for example, zones and areas, and through lighting design as well, that will help audiences have a kind of intimate experience with the robots, but also ensure that safety is there. For example, there could be as for those set ideas I showed earlier, there could be a kind of housing or a cage that means that there's a little bit of a barrier or a sense of divide, but equally we really want to sort of break those divides as well. So it's a challenge, and I think part of it is about building a robot design that's robust enough to tackle the odd collision, let's say.
I also think we just kind of need to be, like, obviously not all of the healthy and safety stuff in place, but I'm not too worried if the robots do get trodden on. I think it would be quite an interesting thing. We've Adrienne's talked around lovely ideas of robot kind of death and what everyone else does in the space when that happens, and both robot and human sort of community around that. And so I think in creating them, we are, I think, kind of necessarily through working very much out of the lab and at home at the moment, working with very kind of like easy to obtain and work with materials. And I think we're going to sort of build it in a way that means if they get destroyed, it's sort of just part of the installation.
Yeah.
Great. I think I guess one final question, which is when and where can we have a go?
Absolutely. So those of you that are in Bristol, we are planning a series of workshops this summer, which are yet to be announced. But probably the best thing to do is to go to neondarts.org and sign up to our newsletter. And there I'll be sending out anything to do with looking for test audiences, the workshops. And then, from autumn 2021, installation version, and then, autumn 2022, the full work with live performance integrated as well.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. This has been phenomenal. I always love a good robot. So thank you both, and we hope to see you again very soon. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. And thank you all for watching. Before you go, next week's talk is by artist Matthew Plummer Fernandez. He'll be talking about the interrelationships of algorithmic systems, pop culture, contemporary issues, as well as how his work has shifted in response to the climate crisis. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PM Studio UK on Twitter, or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to our newsletter on our website. And of course, we do have a year's worth of talks. It is our birthday. So please do dig into the archive. Maybe you want to just roll straight from this talk into another talk. We got your back. We got 40-something talks on there right now to watch. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you want to find out a bit more, and give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. Please feel free to share this link. There'll be a captioned version of the video available to watch again shortly after we finish up on the same link. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you here again next week.